Welcome, everyone. We are so excited about today's workshop, all about first-time home buying. So we're really going to truly cover it all, from how to get your finances in order before you buy a home, what to know before you buy a home about the expenses you may not have thought about, all the things you need to do to prepare for closing costs, down payment, what the home buying process is actually like, how to get pre-approved, how to think about your credit and how that impacts your interest rate. So we're going to get into all of it, and I have some amazing co-presenters with me today that we will all take a chance to introduce ourselves in just a moment. But to get started, I want to just welcome you and give a quick overview of what we're going to go over today. So throughout this workshop, we'll really have these three pieces that we want to cover. The first is personal finances. So tips for preparing yourself for home ownership so that when you actually go and buy the home, you're not just thrown into a situation that's going to be financially overwhelming, but you feel educated and prepared to know what you're getting into. You'll understand how much home you can actually buy given your current finances. So we'll talk about how to calculate how much your mortgage could be or how much total home price you might be able to buy. We'll talk about the home buying process and then also just share insider tips along the way. So we will leave time at the end for about 15 minutes of Q&A. But if you do have questions along the way, feel free to throw them in the chat and we will also answer those as we go. So to give you a little bit more insight into the three sections of today's workshop, we're going to be talking about finances, then credit, then home buying. So when we're talking about finances, we're talking about this overview of the home process and what you need to do before. So I'll share checklist of different items you can think about, things you want to do before you even go and start searching for a home and getting pre-approved, which really flows nicely into part two, which is all about credit. So Ivory is going to be talking to us about what is your credit score, how is it calculated, and how it's going to impact your ability to either buy a home, or when you do buy a home, what that interest rate is going to be and how that impacts all kinds of pieces of the home buying process. And then part three, we're going to have Todd talk to us about what it really means to own versus rent, what some of the pros and cons are there, what it takes to apply for a mortgage, what pre-approval looks like, and then all the key players in the game. Who are the different people you're going to talk to? Why do you talk to them? What do they do? So we're truly going to cover it all today. And I think that leads us into giving an introduction of ourselves. So I'll start with me. I'm Dr. Annie Pohl. I'm a money coach. I'm also the founder of Money Essentials for Women. So we do a lot of financial education to help women meet their money goals. So that's really financial, career, business related, and home buying is one of the biggest purchases you will make in your personal financial life. So that's what I'm here to talk about today. I'll kick it over to Ivory to introduce herself.
Wait, unmute myself. There we go. So my name is Ivory Becker. I own a company called Insight Strategies and a software called Credit Score Pro AI, and then a credit education platform. So everything credit. So we help people in understanding how credit works. We train both professionals who work with people to help them qualify for financing opportunities or nonprofits so they can properly advise consumers. And then we also work directly with consumers to help them in understanding how credit works to improve their scores when there's been credit damage from hardship, dealing with things like identity theft or just negative accounts like collections, charge-offs, all those types of things. So I'm really here today to help in understanding how you can structure your credit score appropriately and do everything you possibly can to get ready for the home buying process.
Thanks, Ivory. Todd, do you want to introduce yourself?
I do. Todd Briefeld. I am with Financing by Todd, which is powered by Nexa Mortgage. So I'm your one-stop shop for all home financing related questions and concerns. My primary focus is I help a lot of veterans and I help first-time home buyers. And the piece where I think I can add the most value is, especially for first-time home buyers, it's a bit of a process and there's a lot to know when buying a home. And so I like to get a lot of upfront education, this class being one of them, but on an individual basis. So when the people start the process, they are a very informed consumer and there's not a lot of surprises that happen during that. It just makes for a much lower stress type of transaction. And so that's primarily where, besides getting all the things and getting the best loan solution for you in place, upfront education so that you feel that you are ready to go when it's time to make that move.
And I'm really excited that we have all of us here today because we're going to cover different pieces, but they all overlap. And each one of us will bring some, some insider tips and things that you may not have thought about when it comes to the home buying process. So I want to dig into part one, which is going to be all about your personal finances. So again, this is what do you do before you even start the home buying process? And there's actually quite a few things that you could do before you start buying your home. So financially preparing for a home, I just to quickly go over what the home buying process usually looks like. If you were to think, okay, I'm thinking about buying a home, what is my checklist? This would be the checklist of things that I want you to keep in mind. So generally, number one, you want to think about your why. I think this is something that gets skipped a lot in the home buying process, but I'm going to teach you in the next couple slides why understanding your why is really important. And that will actually inform how much home you buy or what type of home you buy. Number two, you're going to financially prepare yourself. So that's where you're looking at your budget and deciding how much money I can spend on housing, thinking about your savings and how much you have for that down payment and to cover closing costs. And then also your credit score, which we'll dive into depth, and Ivory will talk about how that influences your home buying ability and the process. Then you go into mortgage pre-approval. Let's say you feel really good, you have your why, you have your finances in order, you get pre-approved. And then number four, you work with an agent to actually go start the home search process, looking for homes. Number five, you have the offer stage. So you found a home you want, you give an offer, you'll then have an inspection of the home and the appraisal stage to make sure that the bank thinks that your home is actually worth the loan you want to take out on it. Everything looks good, you'll move into the final stage, which is the closing stage where you'll lock in that interest rate, sign all the paperwork and move into your home. So keep this in mind as we're talking about the entire flow today. This is kind of how our presentation will flow, as well as how you can think about the entire home buying process. So number one, determining your why. I've listed 5 bold things here that I want you to think about. Number one, we usually go for this one. You want your own space. You just want full ownership and privacy, right? But there's actually these 4 other things that may be really defining factors for you. So number 2, equity building. You're slowly buying your home over time, and that money is being put towards your mortgage versus putting it into rent. So this is a huge motivator for some folks. Number 3, appreciation. So your home, even if you buy it at a certain price now, may appreciate over time. This is not something that's guaranteed, but on average, your home is going to appreciate by about 3 to 5% every single year. So we have an example here of a home you buy in 2025 for $400,000. If you had it increased by 5% for 2 years, you'd have a $41,000 increase in just 2 years. So not only are you getting to keep a portion of the money you put towards your mortgage payment, but you're also increasing your appreciation in your home value. You also can think about fixed costs. So your mortgage is generally going to be a fixed cost. The principal and interest will be. You may have increases in your property taxes or your insurance, but it's going to be a lot less of an increase than rent payments that can go up by potentially 10% every year. And then there's added tax benefits. So you may be able to deduct your interest and your property taxes, as well as we have capital gains taxes that apply to any gains you make from your home over time or the sale of that home. So there's lots of really, really good things that you can get out of your home beyond just wanting to have your own space, right? But there's also a lot of expenses that come with home ownership. And I just want to go over these so that you, again, feel really informed and you know what you're getting into. This is one of the major benefits of renting is that you're not covering all those added payments. So when we think about your mortgage, and Todd will get into this in more depth, but your mortgage payment is actually made up of at least 4 things. Principal being the payment you're making towards your loan. Interest is the interest on that loan. You have property taxes and you have some kind of insurance. So that's just the basic. You're going to pay that no matter what to be able to get into a home. Then you may have HOA fees. Again, we might see these with renting, we might see them with homeownership. There are a lot of homes that have no HOA fees, but you may see somewhere between, $20 and $1,000 a month, depending on the area that you're living in. Maintenance and repairs. This is a huge one. So you can expect to pay somewhere between 1 to 3% of your home's total value every single year. So if you think about this, a $425,000 home times 2%, that's $8,500 a year that you might have to pay in maintenance. A lot of people don't think about this, especially if you buy a newer home or you get into the home and everything, it just got inspected, it's in great shape. You may not be paying this all every single year. You may just have, 5 years down the road, you have to pay for a new roof. So think about costs like a new refrigerator, might be a couple $1,000s. New roof is going to be a major investment. You have plumbing, drywall, electrical, all the pieces of your home. So when you're creating your budget to buy a home, you want to be thinking about not only your mortgage, but also these potential maintenance and repair fees. And then preparing your home or preparing yourself for home ownership. These are kind of the 4 things you want to do in order. So number 1, you're going to find out how much you can spend on housing. That's where you calculate your budget and come up with the amount you can pay monthly towards your housing. Save up for that down payment, which is usually somewhere between 0 and 20% of the home price. Todd will get more into this when we talk about specific loan types and how much you might need to have for the down payment. Number 3, you're going to save up for those closing costs. So when you close on the home, it's usually 2 to 5% of the home price paid in closing costs. Those are on top of your down payment. And then you have the preparing for that buffer of the maintenance, which again could be 2% annually of your home costs. So for a $425,000 home, if we think about it this way, we'd have, let's say, a really low down payment of 5%. That's about $21,000. 2% in closing costs would be $8,500. And maybe you want to have that buffer for any maintenance in the first year. 2% would be $8,500. So you're looking at about $38,000 that you'd want to have ready to go to help with that initial home purchase. So when it comes to the budgeting piece, I mentioned really briefly, you want to look at your budget and decide how much you can pay every month towards your house. This is really the most important piece because if you can't pay that reoccurring monthly cost of your mortgage, it's not time to get into the home yet. So to do this, you can just create a simple income and expense budget. You can write this down on a piece of paper or in a budgeting spreadsheet, and then find out the maximum amount you could spend on housing. Most of the time, it's recommended that you spend no more than 30% of your gross take home on housing. So if we had a couple making $120,000, for example, 30% would get you to about $36,000, which divided by the 12 months in a year would be about $3,000 a month. So from there, you can use a lot of online calculators. I love this one from Bankrate, but if you just Google mortgage calculator, you can find one and you'll be able to actually see, okay, how could I get to about a $3,000 monthly payment for my home? And so I ran an example here. If we look at this one, I just plugged in the home price, $425,000. Let's say you do have a 20% down payment, traditional 30-year loan. We have an interest rate that was automatically calculated as of today for about 7.1%. This is going to get us to the total price up here in the corner of $2,600. So we can see this is just a great way to estimate. You're getting close to the 3,000. Maybe you wanted to be under, so you know that 425 price is really good. You could play around with this, maybe see if you could get up to a $500,000 home, or maybe play with the interest rate. If you know that the interest rate, you could get it down to 7, maybe you'd be able to work with that price a little bit too. So this will just be the way to think about your budget and how it starts to intersect with your total mortgage payment. And then for the other pieces, saving up for the down payment, thinking about those closing costs, there's a couple questions that come up all the time. First one is, how much do I need to put down? And I'm definitely going to lean on Todd to talk about this in his section, but just know it depends on the type of loan. You might have to put 0% down. You might want to put 20% down. There is a wide range, and we'll get more into that. And we'll also talk more about the closing costs in Todd's section. So the next question people ask is, well, how the heck can I save up for this? I would say the first thing that you should do is know the exact amount. So work with someone like Todd to see what you need to save up for, because saving 5% versus saving 20% is going to be a radically different number. Once you know that number, then you can work backwards. So let's say you know the number is 20,000. You know that 12 months of saving would get you to that 1667. Maybe you say, I know I need to make 1667 a month for 12 months to set aside, or you even break it into weeks and say, I would need to make an extra $400 a week. What would you do from there? You could think, how can I cut my budget a little bit? How can I add in a side hustle? How could I potentially look for a new job? And again, this is a temporary goal. So this should be something that you're working towards. It's not necessarily ongoing. You don't need to be setting aside this amount of money for a long time. So think intentionally. Should you do this for just a 12-month period, hit that goal, get into your home, and then make sure you have the monthly amount to cover those recurring mortgage payments. Another common question, what credit score do I need? We're gonna be talking all about this in the next section with Ivory. And then how does my credit impact buying? So a credit score can dramatically impact the interest rate you get, which can have long-term ramifications. So I just want to show this example because I think it's so striking, even for a small difference. We have on the left here, $425,000 home with a 7% interest rate. And then we have the same home over here with a 7.5% interest rate. So tiny little difference, 0.5%. The monthly amount is about $120 difference. We have 2608 versus 2723. But the interest paid over the lifetime of your loan is quite a bit more. You can see 474,000 versus 515,000. That's a lot of extra money that you're paying in interest just for this tiny difference. So again, this is why what Ivory's going to talk about and getting the best credit score and preparing your credit for home ownership is so important. So from there, I'm actually going to hand it over to Ivory and let her dig into everything all about credit. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let you take it away, Ivory.
I'm going to unmute myself here. Okay, I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen here. As long as it lets me. I always do this wrong, so bear with me. I think if I do this, it will go. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay, perfect. Okay, so there is a problem. There's no lesson on credit and home buying. And that's why everyone's here today or watching our recording. So I want to start by talking about the basics of credit. When it comes to credit in general, we're not taught about it in school. Most people are learning about credit from social media, which can be good and can be bad. There's some truth to it, and then there's some fallacies there as well. So really where I want to focus is understanding how credit works, building that foundation so you can have a strategy to have the highest score possible. That way you have the best possible interest rate, like what Annie was talking about. So I want to start with our perspective of what the credit score is. So your credit score is not made for you. And I think that's not something we often think about. The score itself is made for the lender. It's meant to assess risk. How much risk is it if I, as a bank, let you borrow money? And the lower your risk, the higher your credit score, where opposingly, the higher your risk, the lower the score. And if a bank or a lender is going to take on that risk, if you have a lower credit score, they want to make sure they get paid back. This is why you'll see things like extra fees for things like credit cards, or higher interest rates. So obviously credit is important. It impacts every single thing we do. Nowadays, even to get a cell phone plan, you need a credit score. So really, it's just a number to represent what's known as credit worthiness, if you've ever heard that term before. And then the credit report itself is that detailed information showing the credit history. That's the data or the details that are used to determine the credit score. So let's talk about the credit bureaus as well. So the main credit bureaus are Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. Now, something you might not know is there are actually more credit bureaus than these big three. So there's a whole bunch of data bureaus on the back end. Now, when we're qualifying for financing, we're primarily focused on just these big three. And basically the way it works is you have a creditor or a debt collector, any furnisher of information, they pay the credit bureaus. So they pay Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion to send information or send your data, your payment history on that account, and then to report it. Now, they also pay to pull your credit when you apply for debt. So the bureaus are making money off of the creditor sending information and pulling information. So that's often why, and this is a common question we get is, well, I have this account, but it only reports to 2 bureaus. Or I go to this small credit union and they don't even report on credit at all. That's because the bureaus are paid in order to report information. So I think that's just good to know. There's going to be differences in your scores if your creditors aren't reporting to all 3 credit bureaus. Now, also important for you to know is it is your right as a consumer to have accurate credit reports. This means the information itself can't have missing data. It can't be inconsistent across the 3 bureaus. It can't be too old, also known as obsolete. We'll talk about that a little bit more and why that's important in the next couple of slides. But what governs your protections there is the Fair Credit Reporting Act, and then also Fair Debt Collections Practices Act if you have any sort of negative information on your report that's in a third-party collection status. So let's take a deep dive into the factors that contribute to your credit score. So we talked about the bureaus, we talked about your creditors or the furnishers of the information on your report, but how is that score itself calculated? We're going to start from the very beginning. So before you even see this chart, I'm going to get the laser pointer here. Before you even see this graph or this chart here, what happens is you are put into a bucket, a demographic bucket. So the credit score wants to be accurate, right? It's meant to predict risk. So you don't want to compare someone who's brand new to having credit, who maybe has less than a year of credit history and only 2 or 3 open accounts, to someone who has 20 years of credit history with tons of open accounts, right? Those are not fair comparisons. So what happens before the score is even calculated is everybody with credit history is put into different buckets of like statuses. So those with little to no credit history are in one bucket. Those people that have a lot of negative history may be in another bucket, right? That way you're rank ordered against those peers. That's why if your neighbor opens a credit card and it jumps their credit score 100 points and you open a credit card and it drops your score, that's why there's differences. You're not the same. You're not being compared to each other in that like bucket. So that's the good foundational understanding. So once you're put in that bucket to be compared to your peers, you can think of it as a decision tree. So if this, then that, if that, then this, right? So really what that means is if I have one, do you have a late payment on your credit report? Yes. Will you flow into this decision tree? No, you flow into a different decision tree. So credit can be quite a bit more complex than people realize, but here are some basic things to know that are pretty universal no matter what bucket you fall into. So we're going to start by looking at payment history, which is 35% of the credit score. Payment history is focused on, obviously, do you pay your bills on time? But not so obviously, if you close an account, if you close that open and active credit card, for example, that account is no longer factored into your credit score. So that positive payment history from the last 10 years or 7 years or however long it was open no longer factors into your score. So it's important that you keep accounts open and active like credit cards, so that way you're getting that impact from the score on your score calculation, excuse me. Now, another factor that it's kind of like a double-edged sword. If you have negative payment history and you close an account, it still affects your score. So anything negative is still going to impact you because it's, again, about assessing risk. But this is why as you're getting ready to apply for a mortgage, closing a whole bunch of accounts is not a good idea. You may think that it would help your credit score, but it won't necessarily help your score. And I'm going to skip over amounts owed, and we're going to go straight to length of credit history, just because it's along the same thought process. When you close that open and active account, it's going to adjust the average age of open accounts in your credit report, shortening that average age of open accounts. Similarly, if you open a brand new account, it's adjusting that average age of open accounts, right? Now, all of a sudden you have an account only open a month, your average age decreases. So you do also want to steer away from opening a whole bunch of new accounts as you're getting ready to apply for a mortgage. You don't need that furniture store credit card yet. Wait till you get the house, then you can furnish it. So length of credit history, 15% of the credit score. The way you can really hack the system with adding age to your credit profile is credit cards. Obviously, we know when you have a loan, like a car loan, for example, you're not trying to pay on that forever. After your 3-year, 5-year, whatever loan term you choose, it's paid off, right? You're not trying to extend that longer. So the way you can maintain the longest history possible is keep a credit card open for a long period of time. So let's switch gears and go back to amounts owed. This is also known as credit utilization ratio. So this is looking at what is your balance versus your credit limits. Now, when we talk about balance versus credit limits, this is very heavily focused on credit cards. So we're looking at two different calculations, and these calculations are each card individually and all credit card balances versus all credit limits combined. So if you're somebody who has a large amount of credit card debt, one of the ways that you can tackle this credit utilization ratio to help to improve your credit score is focus on the cards with the highest balance but the lowest limits. For example, if you have a $500 limit credit card that's maxed out and a $5,000 limit credit card that's maxed out, both are 100% utilization. They're both 100% maxed out, right? It's a lot easier to pay off that card with a limit of $500. And you're going to affect the calculation of that card, which will then help improve your credit score more effectively. So you start with the smallest cards first and work your way up to the biggest balances later. Now, another common thing I hear is, well, I should keep balances on my credit cards, right? No, wrong. The utilization ratio, I often hear, well, I want 30% utilization, right? I think people are getting confused with 30% of your score is credit utilization, but optimal utilization is actually 10%. If you have a super robust credit profile, tons of open and active accounts, you can get away with 20% and not really see a big increase in score between 20 and 10%. But my caveat to that is these figures really only matter if you are someone who never uses your credit cards. What I mean by that is only open and active accounts help your credit score. So if you never use your credit cards and they become what I call stale, that is not an official term, they're ignored by the algorithm. So you really want to make sure you at least are using your cards once every 3 months so they stay active, and just make sure you're using, not a dollar, using enough to show real usage of the cards. And then don't go to the gas station, swipe your card, and then go home and pay it that same day, because that activity doesn't have the chance to then report. Okay, now if we move next to credit mix, this one's pretty self-explanatory. 10% of the score is credit mix. It's looking at variety. Can I pay all different types of credit or debt responsibly? Whether it's a credit card, auto loan, personal loan, mortgage, do I have good behavior with all types of debt? And so the more variety in your credit report, the more you are rewarded. Now, we'll look at some tips on how to influence all of these factors, but how to influence this one specifically without having to take out debt unnecessarily in a couple of slides as well. And then lastly is new credit. Now, this is one where people tend to hyper focus unnecessarily. New credit is really looking at newly opened accounts and inquiries. So whenever an account is newly opened, or you have an inquiry, think of it as a red flag for other lenders to say, just really saying, hey, new accounts are opened. They may or may not show up on the credit report if it's an inquiry. So be aware that this person has applied for debt. The reason that exists, or there's a temporary drop in score, is so another lender doesn't overextend you, doesn't give you too much debt, and then all of a sudden you can't afford it. So that's really the purpose of inquiries affecting scores negatively. And then with newly opened accounts, think of it as your credit score is kind of holding its breath, making sure you can make your first few payments. And once you make your first few payments, it breathes easy and you're not going to see any adverse impact. So it's very common to see a temporary drop in score once a new account's opened. After a couple payments, you'll see your score recover. And then obviously as it ages, you'll see that help your score more and more over time as well. Lastly, with inquiries, since we are talking about mortgages, don't let inquiries deter you from mortgage applications. A mortgage application inquiry does not affect your credit for 30 days. So if your score dropped within that 30 days, it's probably from something else. There is also what's called the 45-day dedupe clause. So any inquiries for a mortgage within a 45-day time frame only hit your credit once. So again, it's part of the 10% of your score. Please don't worry about it. inquiries affect your score for up to a year, but all these other factors end up eroding the impact pretty darn quickly. So don't be afraid of those inquiries when getting a mortgage. Another common confusion that comes from the application process with credit is the credit score itself. Why does the credit score that I'm looking at not match the credit score that my lender has? I hear that question probably more than anything else. The first score you see here that I'm highlighting is what's known as a Vantage score. If anyone has Credit Karma or they're on the Chase CreditWise or Wells Fargo, I mean, many of the credit card companies that give you credit scores or other places like your banks, they're often providing this Vantage score. Vantage score was created in 2006 by Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion to compete with FICO. So even though the three credit bureaus who we've talked about, I went too far, who we've talked about, they give you your credit scores, they don't actually own this FICO credit score algorithm. This algorithm was created by the company FICO, okay? They just get to use it to make your scores. Well, they didn't like that. So in 2006, they said, we want to compete, we want our own score model. And that's when they created this Vantage score. And to help compete, or to better compete in the marketplace, they decided that we want to offer it for free and make it more accessible than FICO scores, which you have to pay for. With the exception of Experian's website gives you FICO 8 for free. So that's why now we have these two different algorithms that exist for credit scores. And it's created a whole bunch of confusion because your mortgage lender is not looking at this. And if you see the differences on these charts, the weightings of payment history are different. The weightings of credit usage are different, right? So it's not an apples to apples comparison, and neither is right or wrong. They're both right. They're just used in different types of lending. There are many types of lending that are using Vantage. Well, now 4.0, it's updated. So that's I just want to give you the why behind that. And then separately, let's say you are going to Experian's website and you're getting your free credit score on Experian, which is a FICO score. Experian is providing you a FICO 8 credit score. And on the screen, you can see it's a little overwhelming to look at. There's a whole bunch of different credit score models that exist here. So FICO, when it was standardized, the main scores from the standardization that are used, that were used originally, I should say, is called Classic FICO, and that's down here what's used in mortgage lending, 2, 5, and 4. They used to be able to name them different numbers. Think of it as all the same, just like FICO 8's the same. These are really all the same algorithm. They just have different numbers attributed to them, also known as Classic FICO. So the mortgage space is still using the model from 1989. That's why if you go to get a car loan, that credit score they use is going to be different than when you go to get a mortgage or a business loan. A lot of times they're using FICO 8. So again, different than getting a mortgage. So the reason there's so many scores here, so many models for the FICO score, I like this comparison. It's think of it like iPhone generations. You have your very first iPhone. It did what it did and it did it well. It's pretty basic. That's really similar to what this Classic FICO or this mortgage lending score is. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but over time we've refined the models. Our technology has improved. The models have become more advanced, and we have seen changes in consumer behavior as well as the technology. So we've tweaked the models accordingly. So that way it can better assess risk. So we're actually all the way on FICO 10T, which isn't even showing on this chart. And T stands for trended data. And I'll give you a clue. We now have machine learning or AI that's going to be involved in credit scoring. So stay tuned. Mortgage lending is going to be switching to those models and using Vantage scores and the new FICO models in the future. We're thinking probably next year. But for now, these are the scores. And similarly to the differences between Vantage score and FICO, these scores are all going to be different because they've made some tweaks in how they interpret information. I'm going to give you two examples. In the newer versions of the credit score, like FICO 8 and then onward 9, 10, 10T, they started considering negative information that was older than 2 years as less impactful because it's further in the past, the person is farther away from the hardship. That's not true for some of the older versions of the FICO model, meaning if you do have negative history on your credit report, your FICO 9, your FICO 8 scores, they're going to be higher than these classic FICO scores because it has deemed the negative information as less important with the newer models. So that's one example. Another example is paid collections. I think that's an important one to bring up. If you do have negative information, paying your collections will help your Vantage score. It will help your FICO 8 score. It will help your FICO 9 score. It will not help your mortgage score. So that money may be better spent elsewhere or saved or used for the down payment, etc. So I briefly mentioned earlier that you have the right to have an accurate credit report and why that's so important. This isn't just if you have negative information on your credit report. So this slide is focusing on negative information. I'm going to give you an example of positive information. Let's say you have a credit card and they just aren't updating the balance. You paid it off 3 months ago and it's still reporting a balance. Well, that account isn't necessarily a negative account, right? You don't have any missed payments, but your credit utilization ratio is 30% of your credit score. So if that balance is reporting too high, you could have a lower credit score than you should. And maybe that's only happening on one credit bureau. That's not uncommon. So it's really important that you review your credit report and look to see if there's any inaccurate information. On somebody who may have negative information on the credit report, I'll show you this example right here. I think this is one of the more simple ones to look at. We're going to ignore this one. Mortgage lenders will be able to understand this one a bit more because that's a mortgage lender report. But this person had a car that was 30 days delinquent and then was repossessed. So they may have done a voluntary repossession. And then the remaining balance after the car was repossessed, they weren't able to sell it for the full amount that that person owed on the vehicle. So that remaining balance was charged off, just basically meaning that full amount was due. Now this happened August, September, October 2023. Well, if we look at this amount past due section on their official credit report from annualcreditreport.com, we can see August, September, and October are blank for the amount past due. We can clearly see the bureau's made an error and put all that information later, but that is an inaccurate credit report. So that's grounds for anyone to then dispute the report saying this information's inaccurate. And the bureaus either have to fix it or remove the negative account from the credit report. Similarly, we want to look at this example too, because this person is not given any, we're not seeing any positive reporting before they went delinquent. So now all of a sudden they're missing out on all their good payment history, but being hit for their negative. That's not fair. That's unfair to their credit report. And same thing, you would submit a dispute on this and that account may be able to be removed from the credit report. So that's what disputing information can do. It's the bureau's responsibility to keep an accurate credit report. So they either have to fix it or remove it. And most of the time they remove it because they don't want to mess around with trying to fix all the details. So let's summarize some quick tips. In order to make sure you have the best credit score possible, let's start off with how to get a credit score. You do need to make sure you have an open, at least 2 to 3 open and active accounts. You need at least 6 months of history to have a FICO credit score. So you can have open accounts. Let's say you have 2 credit cards. You haven't used them in over 6 months and now you have no credit score because they're stale, right? There's no data. So that's important. Just make sure you're using your accounts. But you do want to make sure you have an active credit card that's been used at least in the last 6 months. I like to say use once every 3 months. So, and you don't want to pay off loans right before applying for a mortgage. My caveat to that is if your mortgage loan officer has needs you to pay off, like let's say an auto loan for my example, it's best to pay that off as part of the closing on the mortgage so you can preserve your credit score. You don't see the drop in your credit score. And then your mortgage loan officer doesn't have to use that payment of your auto loan and calculate it into your debt to income ratio. They can exclude it from your expenses. Now, right now, you can still do this. This will change in the future, but currently, if you have a limited credit profile, you can become an authorized user on a spouse or family member's account to have their payment history flow onto your report. You still need to have your own credit history, but that can be a way that you can influence this length of credit history on your credit report and add some payment history. And utilize credit building tools. You can self-report your rent, your utilities. You can use savings accounts that report like loans on your credit, known as credit builder accounts. If you do these three things, all of a sudden you're affecting your credit mix, your length of credit history, and also your payment history. And then if you want to have at least 2 open and active credit cards, and that's going to help influence your credit utilization. And again, all these other categories, length of history, credit mix, payment history, right? Credit cards alone can affect almost your entire calculation of your credit score. You don't just only want those. So utilizing these tools can help you with creating more variety on your report without taking out debt. And then lastly, as I mentioned, work on resolving derogatory accounts or other reporting errors that may impact your credit scores. I have the Q&A in here, but we're saving that for the end. If you have credit questions, reach out to me. I'm happy to answer those for you. And I'm going to take this off the screen now for Todd. So take a screenshot if you need it.
Yeah, one quick question before we transition. The credit building, any specific tools or websites you recommend? I mean, specifically for reporting on their rent or other utilities, things like that?
Yeah, so on the front page of our website, we have all of the tools listed.
Awesome.
Yeah, there are a lot of them out there. Most of the ones I recommend, on our website are the low cost ones because there are like Rent Reporters is probably the most well known, but they charge very high fees to report your rent. We use a different service called BoomPay. It's $2 a month versus a $200 setup fee and like $10 a month. It's just way more cost effective. But yeah, they're all on the front page of our website.
Very cool.
Oh, and
Thank you.
credit builder accounts, I would recommend Self for a credit
Okay.
builder. So yeah. Okay, let me stop sharing. Oh, here it is.
Great. And Todd, I will pull up your slides for you.
Okay.
Okay, whenever you're ready.
All right, now we're going to get into some of the nuts and bolts with the home buying process. And I really like the flow of the seminar because oftentimes when you come to someone like myself, there might be credit repair issues that we need to take care of before we actually get you financing or improve your credit score so you get a better financing package, because your scores will definitely impact the programs you get and your financing, as Annie notated in her example. So I can go to the, well, one thing I want to talk about before we got into the slides, actually you can go to the next slide. We'll do the benefits. So here are some of the non-tangible benefits of renting your home. And a lot of this stuff, it's really designed for very first-time home buyers. So we start at the basic level. There are some benefits to renting your home in an apartment. There's low maintenance costs. If you have repairs of anything beyond replacing a light bulb or, doing very basic stuff, you call the landlord, they have someone to come out there and they take care of that repair and that expense for you. There's relative freedom to move. Typically you have a 12-month lease when you start, and then after that, it'll go month to month or go to 6 months. But at the end of that lease, you can move. If everything's in good shape, you'll get your security deposit back, but there's not a lot of steps required to move. Lower monthly payments. Now, this can be a little bit debatable because rents have gone up, but typically speaking, your rent payments still will be a little bit less than your mortgage payments. And there's no risk of losing an investment. So real estate, if you look at it over time, it always goes up over time, but there are certain years where the value of homes can dip. So there is a chance that you have to sell during one of those dips. So it's not a foolproof investment where you're always making, no investment is, right? But there is a chance of losing money on investment if you own a home. Obviously, if you're renting, you're not worried about that whatsoever. Some of the non-tangible benefits of owning your home: you can have as many pets as you want. You typically have your own yard or your own space that you can do with what you will. You can decorate the home any way you like. So typically if you go into a rental, it's either eggshell beige or it's industrial gray. Those might be not be your colors, but you're kind of stuck with it, right? Because the landlord doesn't want you to make any adjustments. Obviously, if you own your own home, you can decorate it to your very liking. Significant tax savings, and we'll get into this a little bit more later on, and that is that a lot of the costs around buying a house, your closing costs, points paid, mortgage insurance, the interest that you pay on the loan, those are all tax deductible at the end of the year. So they can reduce your gross, the gross amount that you need to pay each month by reducing your net taxable income. And then the big one is building equity. And I'm actually going to go off slide a little bit here. The reason it's not on the slide is I wanted to get the most recent information because what I had was old. But for myself, homeownership, I think, is one of the pillars to financial independence. So what's I'll tell you what I think the opposite of financial independence: someone who's living paycheck to paycheck, who has very low or no savings. You're kind of financially dependent on the income that you bring in each month. If something happens to your job in very short order, you're in trouble. Financial independence is sort of having space to make other decisions because you're not dependent on every single paycheck. So, and for some folks, you may be far from financial independence, but it's all just a matter of how we kind of set things up in the decisions that we make for in the future. So the stat that I pulled up this morning, and this is from a Federal Reserve survey, 2023, I think that's the most recent survey, people aged 18 to 34, the median net worth for a homeowner was $150,800. So homeowners had net worth of $150,000, let's call it. Renters, $9,700. So there was you have 15 times more net worth if you own a home than you don't. So talking about a financial pillar or a pillar to your financial independence, having a lot more equity in your home or other assets is a big part of that. So one might ask, why is there this disparity? Why do homeowners have 15 times the net worth that a renter has? And I would say the short answer is leverage. And a real quick example I'll give is, let's say you invested $40,000 in stock, and that stock in 1 year went up 5%. You'd have $2,000 in profit, in increased assets. That's a beautiful thing, right? Nothing wrong with that. Let's say you took that same $40,000 and you made that a 10% down payment on a home. So you bought a $400,000 home. That $400,000 home, that asset, even though you only have 10% down on it, if that went up 5%, you're looking at $20,000 worth of equity. So it's tenfold the return because you have tenfold the investment. Now, to be fair, one might argue, yeah, but if I bought $40,000 in stock, Todd, I'm not going to have a mortgage payment each month, right? It's just going to do what it's going to do. Very fair point. You won't have a mortgage payment, but if you bought a home, you also won't have a rent payment. So you're replacing your rent payment with a mortgage payment. So it's incredibly impactful, the benefit of owning a home has on building equity and your net worth. So I'm ready for the next slide, Annie. All right. Again, we're getting to the very basics of budgeting. And the first thing is set financial goals. Now, this could be, I want to save $100 a month for a rainy day fund. A good one is to eliminate debt, and that's got a dual purpose. The reason we say set financial goals is when I teach these type of classes, the vast majority of people, they get money coming in. They may have a rudimentary budget so that they know they have enough, but they don't really have set financial goals. So set some goals, write them down on a piece of paper. They can be lofty, they can be very basic, but if you write down and you have a financial goal for your monthly budget, you are much more likely to accomplish that goal. In the lending world, some of the goals that we like is eliminate debt. One, having debt or an obligation to someone else off the books just feels good, but it also helps you qualify for more on your mortgage if you need to. And I'll get more into that, but there's a dual purpose to eliminating debt. The next one, which I really love, is have 6 months of expenses saved. So, for example, I was saying before, living paycheck to paycheck, we want to try to evolve past that if we can. And if we have 6 months of expenses, let's say you have a job and you have a salary and it's a modest salary and you say, oh, I have this new opportunity, but the compensation plan is 50% of that is salary, but the other 50% is something that is performance-based. But you've been doing this for a while and you have a high confidence that you're going to be able to meet all those markers and you're going to be able to meet those performance goals, right? So you go, if I meet the markers that they set for me, I can make 35% more than I did. You could give yourself a significant raise by taking this job, right? But the caveat is, it might take a few months to kind of get up to speed with those things. You're learning a new system, you're doing different things. And during that time, your salary is only half. So you're living off of half. If you're living paycheck to paycheck and this scenario comes up, one of two things is going to happen. One, you're going to go, well, I don't want to take the risk because I just don't have the money in case something happens to support that, right? So opportunity is lost. The other one is you're going to go, hey, I'm going to go for it. And I love that idea. It's going to add a lot of additional stress to your life. So some of this might say, well, my monthly expenses are, they're $4,000 a month, Todd. So you're expecting me to have $24,000 laying around. And that might be, for some folks, that's not a problem. What I would say is if 6 months feels like a stretch, try to save up 1, 2, 3 months worth of expenses. You'll be open to more opportunities and you'll sleep better at night, to be honest. And then the other one is set investment goals. So the big one for me when setting investment goals is you need to treat your savings like an expense. So when you write out your budget, maybe you haven't written one out before, you go, well, there's rent, there's the car payment, there's the credit card payment, there's utilities, there's all these things, right? What we do is we allocate all the funds we have. And if we don't treat our savings like it's an expense, and let's say we have an additional $300 a month in disposable income. My experience and the experience of a lot of people that I talk to is that you go, hey, I have $300 left over. I'm going to put that into savings. At the end of the month, you have $100 left over, or you have no money left over, or you put a little money on your credit card because you didn't give that savings a priority. So if you treat that like it was an expense and pay yourself first, you're going to find that you're going to be able to save at a much better rate. Now, the easiest way to do this is if you work for the company that has a 401k or some retirement planning, those are the very best vehicles because now this is typically for retirement. However, you can take those funds out earlier for different purposes, education, buying a home. And if you take those out in a certain way, there really aren't any tax implications either. But let's say you have your paycheck and you have a little disposable income, and then you start taking 10% of your income and you have it go towards that 401k. Well, very quickly, what I've noticed is, let's say your paycheck, just pulling numbers out of the air here, drops by $180 every 2 weeks. If you have that disposable, you will very quickly adjust to that new number, and that will be your new number. You'll adjust to your new reality, but in the background, you have money that is being saved. It's being saved tax deferred. And also oftentimes your company will match I've seen as high as 6%. So that to me is kind of a no-brainer. Your company's matching a portion of what you're putting in and you're getting it saved and tax deferred. The other nice thing is it just becomes your new normal where you're not even going, oh, I feel the pinch of not having that extra $180 every 2 weeks. It's just automatically going there and you kind of forget about it. And then you go and check on your account and you everyone is usually pleasantly surprised about how quickly that account is gaining value. So that's one vehicle. If you're self-employed, there are different types of vehicles for every type of employment class, but someone that's salaried or that has a 401k at their disposal and you're not investing in it, I would say at the bare minimum, invest in what your company will match. So for example, my wife's company, they'll match 4%, right? We put more than that, but at the very minimum, we should be doing 4% because she's getting 8% each time she does it because they're matching it. So it's an incredible way to save money where you don't feel the pinch every single month. So I'm ready for the next slide, Annie. Okay. So when we do our budget basics, we start with our very first budget. And this works well in the mortgage context, especially. But we have 3 different categories. We have expenses that you need and you can do nothing about. So you have a rent payment, you have a mortgage payment, you have a car payment, you have fixed payments. They're the same every single month. You can't go to your landlord and say, hey, my rent's $2,000 a month. Will you take $1,500? You could, and it might work 1 month, but obviously you're going to need to pay that money back. Car payment, the same way. If you don't refinance your car payment, it's the exact. So these are fixed payments, and they're payments that you need to make every single month, and you need for your life as well, right? You need to pay the rent so you have a place over your head. You need a car so you can get to work. So those are your fixed kind of mandatory expenses. Then there's expenses that you also need, but you have a little discrepancy with how you spend those funds. So if you grocery shop, again, I'll reference my wife. She likes Whole Foods, or as I like to call it, whole paycheck, because it can be more expensive than some other places. They have great produce. And what I say is, let's buy the produce and all the fresh goods there, but any dried goods or other things that are a little bit more mundane that don't, let's buy those at a place that's less expensive. We can choose how we spend our money on groceries, clothing, different things. Not that you want to sacrifice per se, but if you can save money on these things and you have a bigger financial goal and you can put it towards that, now we're just prioritizing how we're spending money. So speaking of prioritizing how we spend money, the last thing is, this is really disposable income. Things that you want that you don't need. If you don't have those, you're not going to, it's not going to put you out on the street. So that could be premium cable channels. It could be coffee. It could be movies, eating out at restaurants, the things that you do. Now, this is where we get joy in life, right? So I'm not saying don't have any joy in life and just save. But you can say, hey, we go out to eat, especially people that don't have kids. When I didn't have kids, we go to restaurants 3 or 4 times a week. And then you could say, well, let's go once or twice a week and we'll cook, which might involve me cooking, which is a little bit scary, but we'll cook at home and those meals will be more special and we'll save X, Y, and Z. So again, we're not saying, hey, take those things that bring you joy and take those out of life and just get focused on saving money. We're just saying you have control over that. And if you have a priority, buying a home, getting that emergency fund set up, all those different things, you can say, well, at this point, this is slightly more important that we reach this goal. So we're just going to be a little bit smarter about how we spend the money. My big thing is I like my daily coffee. So I got Starbucks today, but I used to get Starbucks a lot. And you go, well, it's, what is it, $4 or $5 a day? It's probably more if you get one of the fancier drinks. But over time, that could be a few $100s. Well, it could be $150, $200 a month. That can go a lot. And so now I say, hey, I'm going to get my Starbucks, but it's a treat. So I get it twice a week. And the other times I make coffee at home, do other things, but I don't really miss my daily Starbucks. I don't feel like in fact, it feels a little bit special when I get my Starbucks. So you can tweak the disposable income and still get joy out of life, but you can also find that you're saving a significant amount of money just by making slightly wiser choices. And I'm ready for the next slide, please. So when we talk about how we're going to budget for a home purchase, there are two questions we need to ask. One, I guess there's three. One is, how much are you currently spending on housing, right? So let's say someone's spending $2,500 a month. They kind of know what their comfort level is. They say, well, I'm at 2,500, that seems doable. I really don't want to go higher than 2,700, 2,800, 3,000, whatever that number is. You know what your monthly expenditures are and your income. And there is that golden rule of 30%. Unfortunately, houses have gotten more expensive. There's still, obviously, when you're in a house and you see that equity, it still makes a ton of sense. But you might have to push up that number, but we want it to be in a comfortable zone. So this is where you have to have some kind of heart-to-heart conversations if you're buying alone with yourself or if you're buying with someone else. And that's, how much can we spend? So as a lender, I might come back and if we get pre-approved, I'll run your credit and I'll get your pay stubs and I'll know what your income is. And I'll say, hey, good news, guys. You guys can afford $3,300 a month. I can get you qualified for $3,300 a month. And you said, well, we really want to keep that number around $2,900 a month. That's our comfortable kind of limit as far as our housing expense. So this is where the rubber hits the road. And these are conversations that people should have before they start looking at a house. You start looking at houses, and guess what? The houses that are kind of at the top end of your range or slightly nicer, they're going to be a little bit more on the monthly payment. So you'll see a house, hey, Todd, we love this place. I'll run the payments. It's $3,100 a month. So this is, and I say you qualify for that, right? You'll get approved for that amount. This is where you have that heart-to-heart where you say, we really like to keep it at 27, or I'm sorry, 29. We're at 31. We can make that work. And that's where you go back to the budgeting basics of the things that, the disposable income, the things that you don't have to have. And you say, yeah, let's go for it. We prefer to be in this house, spend a little bit more each month than we're comfortable with knowing full well what we're stepping into. We get the house, we get the equity, and we'll make it work. I'm okay with those conversations as long as we have those well in advance. Some people that I've worked with, we get them pre-approved. We go over their monthly payment. They're like, okay, we're fine. They look for a house on the higher end of things. And then we send them what's called a loan estimate. Well, I mean, I break this down in conversation beforehand, but the loan estimate's kind of the formal document. And they go, oh my goodness, our housing payment's going to be $3,100. You don't want to have that aha moment when you're looking at houses or writing offers. You want to have that well in advance. So what are we spending? What are we comfortable with? And push comes to shove, how much are we willing to go out of our comfort zone to make this house work? Again, if you go into it with eyes wide open, that's the very best way to make this process that at times can be stressful. That's a point of stress that you can avoid because you can just get on the same page with what your monthly housing expense is going to look like for that home. And Annie, I'm ready for the next slide. Okay. What the bank looks for as far as your credit profile, the 3 C's. All right. Capacity. That's basically how much debt are you capable of bearing with your certain amount of income. So lenders, we love acronyms. I try not to use them, but we do use what's called debt to income, or DTI, quite often. So, and the general rule of thumb is you shouldn't spend more than 30% of your income towards your housing. However, because of housing prices, the places that insure mortgages, that make the rules around mortgages, have bumped that up. And now we'll see where they'll allow up to 50% of your income to go towards housing and other expenses. And I'll get more into that. But capacity is basically how much debt can you bear with your current income level, debt to income, or DTI. Credit score, Ivory went into depth on this. Your credit history and your current scores will determine the amount that you'll qualify for, the programs that you qualify for, and also the interest rate that you're going to get. The cliff notes on this: the better your credit score, the better interest rates you're going to get, and the more programs that you'll have at your disposal. And the last one is collateral, basically assets. How much you have in the bank, 401ks, personal assets. So those are the 3 C's of banking. All right, so here's a quick scenario. It's a little bit dated as far as the home values, but how much can you afford? And so let's say, so again, we want to keep this in the comfortable range, but as lenders, we will typically lend up to 50% of your gross income, less any monthly debts. So let's say someone or a household has gross monthly income of $4,500. 50% of that is $2,250. So $2,250 is the amount that you can afford. But remember, we have to take out any the minimum monthly debt payments. So someone has a car payment for $300. They have a minimum payment on their credit card of $75. So they have $375 in debts each month. So we take their gross income, times it by 50%, we get $2,250. We subtract out any of their monthly debts. Now their new kind of max monthly payment is $1,875. And when we say monthly payment, we'll get into this, there are 4 or 5 different components of that. But I'll break that down in a little bit here. Thank you. Okay, so when we talk about your monthly housing expense, we call it PITI. Again, we love acronyms, so I'll break that down for you. The PI is the principal and interest on the loan. That is the loan payment. So if someone borrows $400,000, that's the principal and interest payment on the loan. But we also need to have homeowners insurance. We call it hazard insurance. So homeowners insurance, flood, fire, acts of God, different things that can happen to the home. You're going to be required to have that. So we include that in the payment. The real estate taxes, which typically we use around 1 or 1.25% of the purchase price. Although when you look for a home, when you're out looking for a home, we know exactly what the taxes are. So we can calculate that. We can get you a very accurate monthly payment. However, just as a general rule of thumb, use between 1 and 1.25% of the purchase price. Those are your annual real estate taxes. And then mortgage insurance, it's insurance not necessarily for you, although you're carrying it, it is for the lender. So as lenders, what we found is that people that are putting less than 20% down, there's a higher level of risk. So as opposed to waiting for people to save 20%, which might take a very long time, there's actually insurance that can be carried that we provide for borrowers that are putting less than 20% down. And that can go from 0, 3%, 5% down, 10% down. And how it works real briefly is it's kind of in these big steps. So someone that has putting 20% down, no mortgage insurance. 15% down, they're going to have a little bit of mortgage insurance. 10% down, it's going to go up even more. 5% down, more. 3% down, it's going to go up even more. And then there are some 0 down options, and obviously that's going to be the highest level of mortgage insurance. It's insurance required by the lender for someone who's putting 20%, putting less than 20% down, but it's paid for by the borrower. Okay, so in our scenario, how much could you afford with that $1,875? Well, in this case, if you bought a place for $330,000, your principal and interest, so the P&I would be $1,344. The homeowner's insurance would be about $43. The taxes in this scenario would be $265 a month. And that mortgage insurance would be $223. If you buy a condo or a place that has sort of shared responsibilities in that subdivision, you might have what's called a homeowners association. In this case, we're just buying a standalone single family home. So there is no homeowners association dues. And sometimes you'll have subordinate financing. So people actually take a second loan as part of their down payment to reduce their down payment amount. In this case, we didn't use that. So those are both zero. So you're at $1,875. So that in that example before where they made $4,500 a month and we took half of that, we took out their monthly debt. This is what someone could afford at that payment. All right. So how much can you afford? Now, this is something, if you're looking, let's say you know yourself, and if you have a significant other, you know what your monthly income is. If you do that, I would always advise talking to a mortgage professional first. But if you wanted to just run some rough numbers, and you could do this very math yourself. Let's say a couple made $10,000 a month and they had $1,000 in other payments. Well, 10,000 times 50% is 5,000 minus that 1,000. You can afford roughly a $4,000 monthly payment. Now, you might not want that. It might not be in your comfort zone, but that's roughly what you can afford. Again, I would talk to a mortgage professional, but if you're just kind of kicking around the idea of buying a house and you're like, I just kind of know roughly what we can afford. So we just go back to the example that I had before, where we take your housing payment plus total monthly minimum debts, and we divide that by your gross monthly income. So it's a very easy formula. You take what the proposed mortgage payment is, and plus your monthly debts, and you divide it by your income, and you'll get that. And if you're under 50%, you should be good to go. Again, this is not necessarily reflective of how much you want to spend. This is how much you guys would qualify for. So, because that will tell you, oh, we're in this sort of a range as far as the houses we should look at. But again, your very first step should be to talk to a mortgage professional so that they can tell you what the monthly payments are going to be at a very accurate level, and then where your debt to income lies, so how much you can actually afford. All right. How much money do I need? So this is a great question because we talk a lot about the down payment, right? What a down payment is, it's almost like when it's a portion of the purchase price, and that's your portion of the equity that you're putting into it, right? So in our examples, someone's buying a $400,000 place, they're putting 10% down, so they need $40,000. So how it works is you write up a sales contract. If it gets accepted, typically within 30 to 45 days, you'll have your closing. And that's where the down payment is required. So to the unnuanced eye, someone would say, oh, I need $40,000 at that time. And obviously they've been saving for it, they have it, those different things. But we're talking about how much money do I need throughout the process? Well, funds you need prior to closing are, one, earnest money. So earnest money is just like it sounds. You write an offer on a home, you say, we are willing to pay this price for the home. You submit it, and if that seller says all these terms look great, you have what's called an accepted offer. You are on your path to buying that home. But to make sure that you're earnest in the transaction, they're typically going to want to see 1% of the sales price put down on that. Now, that's not a fee. That will get credited to your closing. So if the price is $400,000, they're going to say, we need $4,000 to see that you're earnest, to see that you're serious about buying this place. When you go to closing, if your down payment was $40,000, we'll take that $4,000 off, $36,000. It's almost like a deposit. So not an extra fee, you get it back, but it's typically due when you make that offer and the offer gets accepted. Typically within 3 business days, they're going to want to see that earnest money be deposited. Home inspection. A home inspection is different than an appraisal. An appraiser goes out there, he's a third-party individual that is neutral, and they're going to give you the value of the home. So the appraiser's primary focus is what's the value of the home. A home inspection's primary purpose is to tell you what the condition of the home is. So home inspections oftentimes are not required, but I would highly advise everyone to always get a home inspection, because they're going to go in there and they're going to poke and prod and check out everything and check out all the different systems, and they're going to give you a report on the true condition of the home. They can cost between $400 and $500. However, you want to know the true condition of the home. And the beauty of this is when you buy a home, you have something called a home inspection period. This means that, just like it sounds, this is our time. These inspection periods, they can vary between 5 to 10 days. This is our time to have the home inspected to make sure that there are no hidden defects or things that we need to be aware of. The nice thing about this is if you find things like that, you can go back to the seller with your report and say, we want you to rectify these things before we buy the house, right? And oftentimes the sellers will make those repairs or those improvements. The other thing that can happen is there can be a defect that you are unaware of. The roof looked okay, but it's really on its last leg. Or we went into the crawl space and we saw mold, right? Things that could be deal killers, and you'll know about that up front. And then if you're during the inspection period, you can step away from the transaction, get out of the transaction because of inspection issues, and you'll get your earnest money back. So even though home inspections are not required, they are highly advisable. Site-specific inspections. So if you buy a property in a rural area, you might be on a septic system, you might have well water, so you're not tying into the city's water or sewer. You might have different aspects. Those you want tested out. Those tests usually don't cost $400 or $500. They're usually about $100, $150 each, but they're so worth it because if you find something that's a defect. So when I bought my last house, I had the inspection, and then they said, hey, for an extra $25, we can do a sewer scope. I was like, do I really need that? I was being a little, what we say, penny wise and dollar foolish. But my wife said, hey, you cheapskate, spend the $125. Well, what they found was from our house to the main, there was a little kink it was just, I don't know, they were trying to avoid something. Anyway, long story short, they said, that could be something that backs things up. Obviously something we want to avoid. We went back and said, hey, love the house, love everything else about it. We want this. There was a bunch of other small minor stuff that they did, but we want that dug up and we want a straight, line pipe that goes right to the main. So they did that. There was a bulldozer out there, and it's kind of a major thing, but we caught that in the inspection period. Now, if we didn't have an inspection or pay extra for the inspection, guess what? We're in the house for a year or two. Everything's great. And all of a sudden things start to back up. Well, you didn't have the inspection. So it's kind of on you. So I love inspections because one, you know the true condition of the home. And two, you are often able to negotiate much more in repairs than the actual cost of the inspection. And then a foundation certification. This is for someone that is buying a manufactured home on land. So you have stick-built houses, that's your typical construction, and then you have homes that are manufactured and placed. These are becoming much more popular. When you buy one of those, they want to make sure that the foundation is the home is properly tethered to the foundation. So that's an additional inspection. Appraisal. So this is as far as fees that are required before the closing, because we established that the appraisal is to find out what the market value of the home is. But some lenders will charge you for the appraisal upfront, and then some lenders will collect it at the closing. It's strictly a cash flow item because let's say an appraisal is $700 or $800. You either pay for it upfront or you pay for it at the closing. But we're talking about funds that are needed prior to close. Because I might say, here's your cash to close, when you go to your signing and actually take ownership. But we want to address all the funds that might be required during the process. So earnest money, home inspections, appraisal. And one nice, cool thing that a lot of people aren't aware of is that all of the costs above, you can ask that the seller, not the earnest money, I stand corrected, that the seller pay for these. You can have the seller pay for the home inspection, the site through what's called a seller's paid credit. Now this gets into the negotiation of the homes, but if you want to reduce your cash to close, you can ask the seller to pay a lot of these close costs, a lot of your closing costs, and your prepaids. I think Annie mentioned between 1% and 3%. That's a pretty good number as far as the monies that you'll need for closing costs. So let's say you bought a place for $400,000 and the closing costs were 2.5%. I'm using that because it's very simple math. That's $10,000 in closing costs and prepaids. In addition to the earnest money, you can say to the seller, hey, we want a seller's credit for $10,000 to pay for our closing costs, our prepaids, and any of the items above except for the earnest money. And that is allowable. Next slide, please. All right, so funds needed prior to close, we kind of went all over that. All the remaining items, closing costs, prepaids, you will pay that at closing. So how this works is you go under contract, you write an offer, they accept the offer, now you have an executed contract. So we have a live deal and there's a date there, 30 to 45 days. And at that time period, we'll get the financing and everything in place and you will be the owner as long as the inspection and all the other things went through, right? So we will create what's called a loan estimate. And that will say, here's your monthly payment. And here is your cash to close. And that's where you get the number that you need to bring to closing. So speaking about, because I don't think I have a slide here about down payments. Annie's right. You could put more than 20% down, but if you put 20% down, no mortgage insurance, but you can do 15, 10, 5. And then if you want to use down payment assistance, you can go all the way to 0 with the down payment. You don't have to put any monies down. So that number is going to vary. Your cash to close is going to vary greatly between the amount that you put down. My point is the transparency is right when you get into the transaction, here's the exact or as close of an estimate as we can make to the amount that you will need to bring to closing so that all of your finances are lined up that way. You need to withdraw money from a stock account. You're taking a loan from a 401k. You're getting a gift from a family member. All those things take time to process. That number that we give you, if we give it to you a few days before closing, it's not going to do you a lot of good. So we give it to you by law within 3 business days of the sales contract being executed, which again is you make an offer, the seller accepts your offer, an executed contract. So you'll have that number well in advance. And I think I'm ready for the next slide. Okay, some of the players in the home buying process. So you want to talk to your lender right away because you want to make sure that you are pre-approved before you start looking at houses. Now, this has changed a little bit. People used to reach out to real estate agents. They'd go look at a home. They'd like it. And then they'd say, oh, you need to get pre-approved. And that can still technically happen. But we're getting into that situation that we don't want to have where you don't have a really good grasp on what your monthly payment is, how much can you afford, all those things. You don't want to know that while you're actively looking for a house. You want to have that done first. So you'll talk to a lender, and then you'll talk to a real estate agent. They will start showing you different properties. And then I'm going to skip number 3 for now because when you're working with a lender, they're going to have a loan processor, and that loan processor kind of cleans up your mortgage application, and any documentation or anything that was missed, they'll probably be the one that's collecting that. So the loan processor will be working with the lender. You'll have your inspector. So within the first 5 to 10 days, you'll have the property inspected and he'll give you that report. You want an insurance agent because you have to have insurance, and you want to get insurance fairly quick in the process because if you don't have insurance set up and you're close to the end of closing, I've actually seen closings delayed because they didn't have their homeowner's insurance policy, which requires calling an insurance agent, asking for a quote. If the quote looks good, they generate a policy. The policy doesn't start until that closing date, until you have home ownership, but it's in place. And then another lender-related person is the underwriter. So the loan officer is going to originate the loan. They're going to get as much information as they can to have a very complete application. The loan processor is going to look at it with a finer tooth comb. They're going to find anything we're missing. We're going to submit all of that information to the underwriter. So even though as lenders, we can give very strong pre-approvals because We've done a lot of due diligence. The underwriter is the one that ultimately makes that decision. So if the lender and the loan processor have gotten all the information and addressed everything up front, the underwriter basically takes them a day or two, they'll give you an approval. But the underwriter is the formal stamp of approval, if you will, for your loan. And then the appraiser, he'll come out after the inspector, just for the very reason that the inspector will might have problems that might jeopardize the deal, and you don't want to pay for an appraiser if you're not moving forward. So we want to make sure the inspection looks good. And I'm going to put a little pause on this, and I'm realizing that I was a little concerned. I have a couple more slides, or we can go to Q&A, or I can go through my slides really quickly.
We are at 1 minute to wrap up, so I think we'll probably have to close it here, but I
Okay.
can always share out the slides, and then when I send this out as a recording, I'll share all the information to contact Ivory and Todd for more info. But I guess, yeah, in the last 1 minute, Ivory and Todd, want to share anything about your personal contact info so people can get in touch?
Yes, I can put it into the chat. I don't think I have a
You should say it for the recording too, Todd.
Ivory, you're good. You're good. I'm Todd Briefeld with Nexa Mortgage, and my cell phone number is 503-505-4346. Feel free to reach out.
Thanks, Todd.
Oh, my website is Financing by Todd, just like it sounds, 2 Ds.
So you can visit us online at insightstrategies.credit. It's INCITE and then strategies.credit. If you Google Insight Strategies, you'll find us. We're on all the social media apps and things. So feel free to watch the videos on YouTube. We have a whole bunch of resources on our website. If you're looking to work on your credit on your own using something like a DIY platform, we do have the platform creditscorepro.ai that you can check out. But you can also call us at 503-395-3092. We do work everywhere in the US. And if you have complex issues like fraud or identity theft, we can help you with that as well.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. And then if you're looking for more events, resources, one-on-one expertise, you can also go to money-essentials.com. Tons of good resources there. But thank you all for being here today.
Annie,
Yeah, go ahead, Todd.
If we have an extra 2 minutes, Katie, do you have any specific questions for us? Because I think we probably can field a question or two.
I did have one question, but I don't know if it's a quick one. I think I was curious if any or all three of you would touch on how the items that you shared would differ if somebody was paying cash for a home rather than taking out a mortgage.
I'll let you two take it away.
Well, I'll just say it will differ vastly in the sense that it doesn't, and Ivory, I don't want to step on your toes here, but it doesn't really matter what your credit looks like because you're paying cash. You won't have to go through the mortgage process, which everyone loves, but you can avoid that. And then I think lastly, and it's not directly related to us, but probably gives you a lot more negotiating power. If you say, we're paying cash and we can close in X amount of days, very powerful as far as your bargaining position.
The only thing I would add to that is in the higher price points for buying homes, the cash has a little, doing a cash offer has a little less value in the negotiating table just because there are more cash offers. It's less abnormal. So for the higher price points, it's not going to be as valuable as the lower price points for buying a home. Just keep that in mind.
And I would just add, from a financial perspective, the only other thing I would say is remember having cash is king. So if you have cash, is putting your entire lump sum towards the home a good idea? Or do you want to maybe put down a massive down payment so that you have a lower loan amount and get a really good interest rate and then have that bargaining power? But also think about the interest rate you have on the loan and then what you want to do with the rest of that cash. Like if you do want to diversify and invest some of it in the stock market, which is going to average about a 10% annual return. So I just try to think about that, how you're diversifying your investments, and your primary residence sometimes shouldn't be considered an investment by some professionals because they want you to, it's a requirement versus something you're growing your money on. So I think about that too, as far as where you put your cash.
Yeah, that strategy piece before you do the down payment is huge because as Annie was mentioning, you can use those resources for other things. And that's usually a fairly quick conversation with someone like Annie, as far as getting the ball rolling about, do you want to put it all down or do you want to do these other things that I often see people not having. So that's a great point, Annie.
Anything else, Katie?
No, that's it. That was really helpful. Thank you.
Awesome. You're welcome. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks again, Ivory and Todd. If you need anything else, visit us on all the websites we mentioned, and we just wish you the best of luck in your home buying process. All right. Take care. Thanks everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.